The year is 1492. Hook. Picture this: 3 ships bob violently in the Atlantic darkness, their crews convinced they're sailing toward the edge of the world. The captain hasn't seen land in over a month. His men are muttering about mutiny. Then, at 2 in the morning on October 12, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana spots something in the moonlight and shouts the words that will change everything: Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land! Preview. Today we're diving into that world-shattering voyage of Christopher Columbus, exploring the final conquest of Islamic Spain, uncovering the beginning of one of history's darkest chapters with the expulsion of the Jews, and discovering how the very concept of our modern world was literally being drawn into existence. Context. The year is 1492. Europe stands on the precipice of transformation. The medieval world is crumbling, and something unprecedented is taking its place. The Ottomans control the eastern trade routes. Portugal is pushing around Africa's coast. And in Spain, after nearly 8 centuries, the Reconquista is about to reach its stunning conclusion. Let's begin where it all starts to unravel. Picture the morning of January 2nd. From the towers of the Alhambra, the last Moorish stronghold in Western Europe, white flags flutter in the Andalusian breeze. After 781 years of Muslim rule in Iberia, the impossible is happening. Muhammad XII, known to the Christians as Boabdil, rides out to surrender the keys of Granada to Ferdinand and Isabella. Legend says his mother told him, "You weep like a woman for what you could not defend like a man." Harsh? Perhaps. But she understood what was really ending here. This wasn't just about one city. The fall of Granada meant Christian Europe had finally, definitively, pushed Islam back across the Straits of Gibraltar. The psychological impact was enormous. For the first time in centuries, Europeans felt they were winning. But here's what's fascinating: Ferdinand and Isabella initially promised religious tolerance. The surrender terms guaranteed Muslims could keep their faith, their customs, their language. Within a decade, those promises would be dust. Sometimes the most significant historical moments aren't the dramatic ones, they're the quiet betrayals that follow. Just months after this triumph, on March 31st, Ferdinand and Isabella signed a document that would haunt Spain for centuries. The Alhambra Decree. In one stroke of a pen, they expelled every Jew from their kingdoms. The Jews had 4 months. For months to sell their property, settle their affairs, and leave the land many families had called home for over 1,000 years. They could take anything they wanted, except gold, silver, or precious stones. Imagine having to sell your house, your business, your life's work in 4 months, and walking away with nothing but what you could carry. The human cost was staggering. Historians estimate between 40,000 to 200,000 Jews faced this impossible choice: convert to Christianity or leave forever. Many chose exile. Entire communities packed onto ships bound for Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, anywhere that would take them. But here's the tragic irony: Spain was economically shooting itself in the foot. Jewish communities included some of the kingdom's most skilled merchants, financiers, physicians, and scholars. The very people who could have funded Spain's golden age were being driven away just as that golden age was beginning. Some contemporary accounts describe ships so overcrowded that passengers died standing up. Others tell of pirates preying on refugee vessels, knowing their human cargo was desperate and defenseless. It was ethnic cleansing, pure and simple, dressed up in religious rhetoric. Now here's a detail that'll make your head spin. On August 3rd, as the last Jewish refugees were loading onto ships in Spanish harbors, 3 different ships were preparing for a very different journey from the small port of Palos de la Frontera. Christopher Columbus was about to attempt something most educated people thought was suicidal. Not because they believed the earth was flat, that's a myth. Medieval scholars knew perfectly well the earth was round. They thought Columbus was an idiot because they believed the earth was much larger than he claimed, and that he'd die of thirst and starvation long before reaching Asia. They were absolutely right, of course. Columbus had catastrophically miscalculated the earth's size. If America hadn't existed, he and his crews would have died in the middle of the Pacific. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come from the most spectacular mistakes. For 36 days, they sailed into the unknown. No European had deliberately sailed that far from land and lived to tell about it. By early October, the crew of the Santa Maria was approaching mutiny. Columbus later wrote in his log that he was within days, perhaps hours, of turning back. Then came that cry in the darkness, "Tierra!" At dawn on October 12, Columbus stepped onto a beach in what we now call the Bahamas. The Taino people who met him had no idea they were witnessing the beginning of the end of their world. Columbus wrote, "They ought to be good and intelligent servants, for I see that they very quickly repeat whatever is said to them." Think about that sentence. Within hours of first contact, he's already envisioning slavery. But let's step back from these world-changing events for a moment, because something equally remarkable was happening in a print shop in Nuremberg. Hartmann Schedel was putting the finishing touches on what would become known as the Nuremberg Chronicle, one of the most ambitious publishing projects of the 15th century. This massive tome attempted to chronicle the entire history of the world from creation to the present day. It contained over 1,800 illustrations. Imagine the ambition. It was printed in both Latin and German, making it accessible to both scholars and ordinary educated citizens. Here's what's absolutely extraordinary about the timing. Schedel was trying to document the complete story of human civilization just as Europeans were discovering that their understanding of the world was completely wrong. His chronicle includes elaborate descriptions of the three known continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, with blank spaces at the edges marked terra incognita. Unknown lands. By the time the first copies were being bound and sold, Columbus was already sailing back to Spain with news that would make those blank spaces suddenly, dramatically relevant. The medieval worldview that Schedel was so carefully documenting was already obsolete, and nobody knew it yet. Meanwhile, in Rome, something rather more sinister was unfolding. Rodrigo Borgia had just been elected Pope Alexander VI, and if you think modern politics is corrupt, you clearly haven't studied Renaissance papal elections. Borgia essentially bought the papacy. Contemporary accounts describe mule loads of silver being delivered to cardinals' palaces the night before the election. One chronicler wrote that Borgia committed the most unheard-of simony, selling the keys of St. Peter for gold. But here's the thing, Borgia's corruption would have consequences far beyond Rome. His son Cesare would become the model for Machiavelli's prince. His daughter Lucrezia would become synonymous with Renaissance intrigue. And his papacy would contribute to the religious cynicism that would eventually fuel the Protestant Reformation. The irony is delicious. In the same year that Spain was expelling people in the name of religious purity, the Catholic Church was being taken over by a man who treated the papacy as a family business and the Vatican as his personal ATM. Rap UP. So there you have it. Within 12 months, the medieval world had effectively ended. The last Muslim kingdom in Western Europe had fallen. An entire people had been driven from their homeland. 2 new continents had been discovered. The printing press was democratizing knowledge just as that knowledge was being revolutionized. And the Catholic Church was embarking on a level of corruption that would eventually split Christianity in half. 1492 wasn't just a year, it was a hinge point in human history. Everything that came after, colonialism, the scientific revolution, the Protestant Reformation, the rise of capitalism, can trace its roots back to these 12 extraordinary months. Next time, we'll explore how these chickens came home to roost in 1493, as Columbus returns to a very different world than the one he left behind. And so concludes our journey through 1492. Join us next time as we explore what the year 1493 has in store.